Hello, fellow griever. You have found the Leftover Pieces Suicide Loss Conversations podcast, and I am Melissa, your host. I am with you on this journey because my 21-year-old son, Alex, died by suicide on August 7th of 2016. Since launching this podcast in late 2020, I have followed my heart and expanded the Leftover Pieces to include books and an online community where I host Zoom support groups every week. It is there, in this community, that I lead other parents who have lost a child by suicide from survival toward hope and into healing. The website is also a resource hub, a connecting point for all survivors of suicide loss. You can find me, ways to connect with me, and links to everything that I'm doing in the community on my website, theleftoverpieces.com. Know that I'm always open to suggestions and feedback. And if you know someone that I should connect with to be on the podcast, please let me know that as well. So now, I invite you to join me for real conversations, candid talk on hard topics surrounding the loss of our loved ones by suicide. I talk to other loss survivors, mental health experts, advocates, and on alternate weeks, I offer shorter solo episodes where I go down the rabbit hole to discuss things that have been on my mind or possibly parts of my journey that I feel would be beneficial to share. Every week, we explore the questions that haunt us, seek the courage to uncover the healing tools within us, and offer the comfort of a community that we all need so very much. It's true that our hearts and lives have been shattered, but come along with me, and together, let's choose to find meaning and even happiness amid the leftover pieces before us. Welcome. Hello, fellow grievers, and today you have reached Season 4, Episode 30 of the Leftover Pieces Suicide Loss Conversations podcast. And today I am bringing you another installment of the Roundtable series I have been doing this season. And this time I sat down and spoke with three fathers or three dads who have lost their children to suicide. Today you're going to hear me talk with John, Corey, and Tom. All three of these men lost their sons to suicide, and the conversation is eye-opening to me. I have sat down and spoken with a few fathers in my time of doing the podcast, not nearly enough, and to have three of them together was such a gift to be able to take in everything they had to share. Some of the things that we talk about in today's episode are obviously we discuss their lost story, and each of them brings a very unique story to the table. But they also spend time talking about their feelings, the feelings that they had when their loss was new versus now. We talk some about relationships of all types. We talk about their biggest challenges. And we also talk about any advice. At the end, they give advice to anybody that may be listening from where they sit in their journey at this point. So I think that this episode is going to be really powerful for dads that are listening, but I personally think that the takeaway for moms or wives, however you want to look at that, and even siblings listening to a dad's point of view would be something that you could take an awful lot from. And I sure hope that this is only the beginning of more regular conversations with dads and husbands and men in general in the grief and suicide loss space. And so let's get ready to hear from John as he discusses the loss of his son CJ 13 years ago, Corey as he discusses the loss of his son and best bud, Christopher, who he lost 9 months ago. And Tom share about Nick, his son and greatest pal, whom he lost just over 2 years ago. So without further delay, let me welcome these dads to the podcast. Welcome, gentlemen. It is honestly a huge privilege to have the three of you here to have this conversation tonight. As I told you guys when we were chatting a little bit before, it's not as common by a long shot for me to have dads on the podcast. So it means a lot. And I know it's going to be an episode that is probably listened to over and over again by many dads, wives, and kids alike. So I would like to take a moment and let each of you introduce yourselves and tell your lost story. And there's no set way to do that, whatever that means to you. So I will start with you, John, if that's okay, and we'll just go around from there.
Sure. So my name is John Twomey. It's kind of bad already. My son was CJ, and 13 years ago on April 14th, he took his life. We have 2 days that go with the April 14th. So the April 14th, he shot himself, and on April 15th, he died. So it has been a long 13 years, a lot of changes in our family, a lot of changes in our household, some really good, some things that have come out of this, some of the work that my wife has spearheaded and I've driven the logistics of, that's how I'll put it. But it's just been, as we said earlier, it's just changed over the years from just an absolute numbness, quite possibly for years. I think if we go back and look at it, to where it is now, where there's a lot of emotion.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate you getting us started and appreciate you being here. Corey, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story as well?
Yeah, my name's Corey Dupes. My son, Christopher, took his life on August 29th last year. My story, I guess, kind of goes a typical day as every other day. I was just leaving work for the day, and my son's girlfriend texted me and asked if I'd heard from Chris today. And it kind of dawned on me that no, I hadn't heard from him. And I talked to him every day, mostly by text, but I hadn't heard anything from him on that day. And I drove home from work and I thought, well, he must just be playing a video game, or he had said that he had some job interviews lined up. So I thought maybe he was off at a job interview and just hadn't gotten back to me. And I kind of rushed it off until she pushed me further and said, well, he's not responding to me either. And that never happens. And then she told me that she contacted his mother and said that she hadn't heard from him as well. And being that I lived the closest to his apartment, I decided to take a ride over. And fortunately, his landlord is in the unit below his apartment. So I got his landlord to let me in the building, but the door was deadbolted. So long story short, the landlord tried to find keys. He got a key, but there was a second deadbolt that couldn't be opened from the outside. There was no key for that. And after pounding on the door and calling him and texting him, and I just couldn't get an answer out of him, I took it on myself to climb a fire ladder on the side of the building. And luckily his window wasn't locked. So I was able to rip off the screen and crawl in through the window, which was quite a sight, me diving across his kitchen table to come in through the window. And he had a curtain across from the kitchen to the living room / bedroom. And when I slid open the curtain, I could see there was a form in the bed. I introduced myself as I was coming in, so I didn't want to startle him if he was just sleeping or something. And I told him that it was just Dad coming in. And I kind of shook his shoulder and said, Chris, wake up. And I pulled back the covers at that time. And that's when I saw the gun in his hand and the stain on his forehead. And it was horrible. I mean, his skin was gray like a zombie, and it just, I don't know. You guys know what it's like. My whole world kind of ended that moment. I screamed, I cried, I swore. And then it was a whirlwind after that. Somebody was knocking on the door, asking to be let in. And I unlocked the door from the inside so his landlord could come. And I don't even remember what happened after that. Before I knew it, the police were there, and I heard his phone ring, and I looked down and his phone was there on the bed right next to him. And I saw it said mom on it. His mother and I have been divorced for several years, but I knew somebody had to tell her. So I picked it up and I answered it. And I could tell she was pretty taken back by hearing my voice answer Chris's phone. And I told her, and that set me off again, because obviously she freaked out and didn't believe me. And I'm standing there over the body of my son, my best bud, and having to tell people that he was gone. And I know you all know how it feels, so I'm okay saying it, but I cried and I punched his dresser, and then I fell to the floor and sobbed, and then I screamed some more. And it was just like a cycle of every emotion that I have going around and around, and not a fun day.
Worst day of your life, the day your life changed forever.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that our lives change forever the minute that the baby comes into the world, the minute our child is born. We just don't have any blueprint or any way to prepare for the fact that our child could leave while we're still here, because that's not part of our plan.
It's not.
And so there's not any way to comprehend that. And I appreciate your bravery in being here and telling your story. Thanks so much, Corey. I look forward to the rest of the conversation. Tom, would you introduce yourself and tell them your story, whatever that means to you?
Sure. My name is Tom Corpora. We lost my son, Nicholas, on April 30th, 2021. Much like Corey, unfortunately, it was just a normal day. It was a Friday afternoon. And actually, I came home. I just finished for college at Cincinnati on Tuesday. We had a great drive home. We laughed. He was my little man. We always laughed. That was our relationship. And he was going to actually start. I work for Caterpillar. He was actually going to start on Monday with an internship at my company and for the summer. And it was Friday. I got home and I didn't even pay attention to anything. And I called up my wife and I said, "Hey, where do you want to go out to dinner at?" And so she said, "I'll be home in 20 minutes. And I went upstairs and didn't even think about Serena or Nicholas. Didn't even know if either any of them were home. And I opened the door to his bedroom. And that's when I saw him. And at first I thought he spilled Kool-Aid on the carpet because of the rat. And then I looked down and I saw the gun. Completely caught off guard, had no clue that he was upset or depressed. He could have won an Academy Award. Zero clue. Like I said, we had a lot of fun on Tuesday. I talked to him a lot. I talked to him probably every 2 days. He'd call me or I'd call him. He'd always want to know what's going on with the stock market, whatever going on with ESPN. And like I said, we talked a lot. After his death, I guess I realized that none of these conversations that we had every day were anything in depth or deep. They were all superficial: sports, stock market, which we invest in, that kind of stuff. But it was conversation every day, or at least every other day. So at that point, I called 911, obviously, and it took them 22 minutes to get here because I went to the wrong address. And that was just horrible because I was just sitting there watching him for 22 minutes. They came, and then unfortunately, my wife came home to this horrific scene of ambulances and police cars everywhere. So yes, that was the day that changed my life. My life has not been the same since. I've been in his room once since that happened. So I never go in his room. I walk past his door every day, but I never go in his room.
Yeah. I can only imagine. I did not find Alex. He was at college and he had never lived in the home that we were in. He had spent 5 of his last 6 weeks in the room across the hall from me, made it his own while he was there, but I don't know how I would have handled his room. So if it had been the home that he had grown up in and those things, so I don't blame you at all. I appreciate you sharing that. And again, it never gets easier to hear this. It never gets easier to hear that another parent is feeling this way and has experienced this loss. But it's so important that we talk about it if we're going to, at some point, lose less kids to suicide, because as we know, it's still on the rise. And if we don't talk about it, we won't know how to grieve. So I appreciate it, guys. Let's go right into the next thing, which is I want to talk about what feels like the obvious, which is let's start by talking about feelings. Let's just go straight for the uncomfortable, because that's the thing that we all know is harder, at least traditionally, and by society's perception, but it is often harder for men to express their feelings, especially outwardly, but it's a lot to carry to be the role of the father or the protector and the dad. And I'm curious to hear each of you kind of talk about, maybe especially for like John, you've been doing this grief journey a lot longer. And I know, like you said, I'm 7 years in almost. I'm knocking on the door of that. It's been 7 long years for me. It's been 13 long years for you. But in some days, I'm sure it feels like 13 short years to you as well, right? It's almost a blink of an eye sometimes, and it feels like an eternity. So the feelings that you had and the way you navigated them then and the way you navigate them now may be very different, but I'm interested to hear you talk about how you navigate that in a world of, as a man, as a dad.
So I would say initially, the numbness, I looked at it like we just had to keep moving forward. If we stopped, it would get way worse. So for the longest time, and we had the greatest of neighbors, they were in the house every single day. Dinners were prepared, everything. Both Hallie and I were for great employers, separate employers, but they didn't push us to come back to work. And so we could be with each other. We had family coming up and visiting us, but the neighbors were there almost continuously. It seems like a blink of an eye, but when we look back on it, they were in the house for months, and then it stopped. And then the neighbors stopped coming, not because they didn't, but because they had their own lives. And we had to figure out a way to continue to move forward. And that's where I kind of adopted all right, I'm logistics, so we're just going to continue to move forward. We were all struggling, and we had tried individual therapy. We had tried family therapy and talking and stuff like that. And really none of that helped us. But for me, my role was just to keep us moving forward. If there was something that we were going to go do, we were going to go do it as a family, not as a family of 4 anymore, but as a family of 3, and to kind of work our way through our new normal and to see what that was. So we fast forward to 13 years later. Our youngest son is grown up. He's married, has a life of his own. Super proud of him. And it's Hallie and I now in Florida. And I still have the logistics piece of me that keeps us moving when she's struggling. But now I find that there are days that I struggle. And it's tough.
Yeah, it's not a predictable journey, that's for sure. And it's definitely not linear. A lot of people, even us, when we start this journey and we get to a certain point, we start thinking this is going to get easier, or, oh, I'm going to not go back to that place again. I don't even know. It doesn't even make sense to put it together, but I still have that happen sometimes too, where I think I'm doing a little bit better. And then 6 months later, or at the next anniversary, or fill in the blank, it doesn't even there's not even a logical sense to it most of the time, where you just think, for some reason, I'm really struggling badly right now. And as hard as it was in the beginning, and maybe this is some of what you're articulating a bit, as hard as it was in the beginning, as sharp as it was, as raw as it could be at times, the permanence of it and getting farther away from them is really hard, because we don't quit loving our kids. We love our kids more every day, the same as we do our living children. And so you have, with Connor, you experienced this as he got married, and how bittersweet, right? Hallie officiated, correct?
Yes.
So how bittersweet to have been such a part of your son's wedding and yet to do that without CJ. There was that piece of it that didn't make sense still, right? And I'm sure for Connor as well. And I know my youngest son thinks about those things a lot as he grows up. And the fact that he's about to turn 26 and his brother was 21 is still hard for him to wrap his head around, because he said he was recently on a siblings episode like this. And if you guys haven't listened to it, it would be probably one that you might enjoy, because to hear the kids talk about how they've done this is really, it was a gift to me to hear. It was Parker and two sisters, one that had lost a brother and one that had lost a sister. And to hear them talk about how they navigate it and what they do, because Parker said, I'll be 80 someday, I hope, Mom, and Alex will always be my big brother. And yet he will forever be 21. So we experienced that in a different way, but it is really hard to have the years pass as well. So there's I don't even want to say good, but there is the good and the bad of the years passing. So yeah.
The milestones definitely hurt.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Corey, would you like to speak to the feelings a little bit, and maybe from a different angle a little bit? Because, I mean, you have a girlfriend, and if you don't mind if I ask, do you live with your girlfriend? Is that something you navigate together?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
We've been together for 13 years now. And
so it's almost silly to say girlfriend, isn't it? She's your life partner. Okay.
Well, technically we are engaged, though we have not set a date yet. We've been engaged for, I don't even remember, 4 or 5 years now.
I bet she knows, Corey.
Yeah, I'm sure she does. So yeah, she obviously was like a stepmother to Chris. And I find one of the biggest things that's helped for me is the times when I'm losing my shit, she's got it together and she can pick me up, and she's strong at those times. And the times when she's not altogether there, I'm able to pull her up. It's like we've been a good team to get through this together. It's a terrible thing that's almost impossible to get through, but she has been a rock for me and has helped keep me strong at my weakest moments. And obviously, as I mentioned in my intro there, that the emotions that I went through were all over the place in short sequences, and still are. Like, I find myself at times just plugging away with the day, getting stuff done. And then all of a sudden another song comes on the radio that was a band that me and Chris liked, or a band that we saw together, or like one of his favorites was Linkin Park. And we actually took him out to California on a vacation, and by coincidence actually met Chester Bennington while we were waiting in line to go into a concert. And it was one of the greatest joys of his life. And then, of course, Chester died by suicide, and that devastated Chris. But I was just happy that he did get to meet his idol before it was too late. But I don't know, it is hard to put everything into words, especially in a short format like this. But I do hope that from this, more people, more dads, more guys can be more willing to share their emotions, because I do think it is another stigma that the guy has to just shut up and suck it up and just swallow how they feel. And I think it's helpful to talk about it, just like the moms do and like the sisters. And it feels good to me to talk about it and get it out. And I know that I've had a strong group of friends around me that have always just been friends that have just been there. And we chat from time to time, or through Facebook or whatever, we keep in touch. But I have a bunch of them now that are like routinely reaching out and just saying, how are you doing? And I'm surprised, because from what I heard, so many people lose friends when this happens, because people don't want to talk about it. They want to just shuffle it under the rug. But I've had a really strong group of people that keep reaching out to me to say, how are you? And I appreciate that. And hopefully more people will take away from this. That's a good thing.
It is a good thing. And yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And I agree. And as I move to you, well, wait, really quick, something dawned on me a second ago. Corey, Christopher was your only child, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my only child.
Okay. That was my recollection. So I wanted to make sure that was accurate. So as I move to you, Tom, and your words of saying that he could have won an Academy Award, that you had no idea. We were in somewhat of a similar situation. I mean, Alex had what I considered some situational anxiety the last semester, but it didn't seem to me to be anything outside of what you would expect a 21-year-old in college to be going through. So we didn't have any outward signs. He didn't have a history of depression or anything like that. So it was very surprising to us too. And as I sit in a room of men who all lost young men, and we know how many more young men die by suicide than young women. And statistically, we're sitting here with 4 sons. And most of us didn't see it coming. Even if there was a fight or an argument or something, in our minds, it didn't equal the outcome. The outcome could have never been foreseen. And I think that speaks to what we're trying to talk about here, which is why it's important that men talk about their feelings, because it is such a hard thing for many men to bridge, especially with other men. Like you said, you and Nick seem to talk mostly surface stuff, and I don't think that's abnormal. I think that's pretty normal for dads and sons to relate to each other in a, hey, did you see the game? Hey, giving each other a little bit of rough. And I don't know how, and we're not going to solve it tonight. We're just touching the topic tonight. But that's why talking about the emotion is important, is because we have to start bridging the gap back to the younger generation to make it a little bit easier somehow to talk about it with our dad or with our brother or with our uncle when we're struggling, and to be able to open that flow of conversation, if you will. So, Tom, I'm interested to hear you speak here on the feelings of it all, and maybe the thoughts of before and how you feel now, if there's any difference.
Well, mine might be a little different. I have a huge sense of guilt because my son took his life with the gun that was in the house. Now, I was in the military since my son was 8. We shot BB guns. I taught him. I was an expert shot. I taught Nicholas how to shoot. And as a matter of fact, last summer, we all went out shooting again, weapons. So the fact that he used one of my guns in the house, it's just guilt. My wife doesn't feel that way because of one thing, that even though my son could have provided an Academy Award, he had, for his feelings of not knowing the way he was feeling, he journaled. And unfortunately, it was after he died, we found his journal, and he had wrote in January that April 30th was going to be his last day. So regardless of, it doesn't matter if there was a gun in the house or not, he would have found a way because April 30th was his last day. And to me, as much as I've read on suicide, you could change your mind in as little as 7 minutes. So the guilt is that if it wasn't that easy for him to do it, it could have been 10 minutes and maybe he would have changed his mind. So I still struggle with the guilt on a daily basis, and it is horrific. So obviously I miss him. And like I said, he was my buddy. We had a lot of fun together. We always were in the laugh mode. Like I said, he was almost the perfect child. He listened. You asked him to do something, he did. It was unbelievable. But so like, and my feelings might be different than you guys because I have the guilt. You guys, obviously, John, you don't have the guilt. Corey, you don't have the guilt, but I have the guilt. So that's what I live with every day.
I think all of us have some guilt. I mean, just being a parent, right? I mean, and I can't speak to each of you guys, but I mean, just being a parent, I have the guilt of how didn't I know? How didn't I know when he went back to school 8 days earlier that he wasn't in a better place? Because I thought he was. We talked about it. We were open. I was his mom. Why didn't I know? Why didn't I know to make the phone call? Why didn't he reach out? But that's not to take away from understanding exactly what you're saying. And that has to be an awful lot to carry. So I'm really sorry for that. And feel free, gentlemen, as we move through these points, if you want to add to any of it, feel free to say, I want to add to that. There isn't any, we don't have to stick to a script here by any means.
Yeah. So I'll say the guilt will be forever because we got into an argument just before he did it. And it it didn't start out like a crazy argument, but it ended like a crazy argument. And instead of just letting the heat of the moment go and just giving him a hug and telling him I love him and that we'll figure it out, we both stood our ground, and he walked out of the house, went down to his car, drove up the road, drove back down the road, and in front of me, shot himself. So it's there will always be guilt, because as a parent, you didn't see it. And as a parent, when the moment came that you could have potentially changed that time in just a short period of time with words and actions, we didn't. And you never think that's the last moment, but that was the last moment.
It doesn't feel like it should have been, right? But it was. That's the complication of suicide that's so hard for people that thankfully haven't experienced it to understand. But those of us that have know how very complicated it is. And the guilt piece, what we're talking about here, is a lot of the complication of suicide, because it would never be any less painful to lose a child, whether it was to cancer or an accident or something like that. But a lot of those things don't carry this complicated factor of the decision. I'll just say that because the decision, I grapple with the word choice because I'm not often sure that I feel like choice is the right word to use when someone's mind in those moments isn't their own, so to speak. But it still feels that way. There's still that element of the choice or the decision that was made in an instant. And that is different than something that by layman's terms would be out of their control if it was cancer or an accident or something. So the fact that they were the one in the physical driver's seat, even if they weren't emotionally, is what complicates it so much. And as parents, I've always said, if I got to the end of my life and as long as my kids were good, like I would have been, that was what I needed to know came from my life. Like my accomplishments weren't going to matter, but that somebody said, you sure have 3 great kids, and to look at them and know they were happy and healthy, that was going to be considered like success to me. And so what do you do with that now? Right. So, and it doesn't diminish the 21 years he had. And that's the difference. As you grow in your grief, I start to focus more on his life and the 21 years I did have. But boy, it's hard for a suicide loss parent to get out of that moment that they died and the guilt of those moments of how they died. So yeah, I appreciate you guys addressing that. And knowing what I do of your story, John, I felt like that it would be, I'm glad you decided you wanted to share that, because I'm sure that it was a little helpful for Tom to hear that, because a lot more people carry that direct guilt than we probably realize based on the circumstances of how they lost their child. So this one's kind of, I know you guys had a chance to think about some of these talking points a little beforehand. So hopefully you've thought about something, because even as I think about it, I think I'm about to ask you guys what your biggest challenge has been so far in your grief journey, in your loss journey. And that's a challenging question. So I'm interested to know, Corey, why don't I start with you this time just to mix things up?
Okay, I'll start. And I just wanted to touch back on what we were just talking about with the guilt, and say, while I don't have the same sort of guilt that Tom would feel by being the owner of that gun, or even John's guilt of just having a fight with CJ right before that, I do still carry guilt for the same things that you said, for not picking up on this and not pushing for help for him. I mentioned to you when we spoke before that Christopher did sometimes go into what he would call a funk, and he would stop going to work for a couple of days, and he would always I'm just in a funk, I'll get over it. And things would be fine. They would go back to normal. And the last period of time before he took his life was, I believe, like a 3-month long funk that he kept telling me he was applying for jobs and had interviews lined up and stuff that he was doing, but nothing, he never did any of them. He just kept telling me it. So it seems like what Tom was talking about with the superficial conversations, I had a bunch of those when it came to talking about his future and what he was going to do. And I feel like in my effort to allow him to become his own man, I didn't want to like control him and put my fist down and say, you need to do this, because I wanted him to learn to survive in the world out there. I wanted him to have his own apartment so that he could learn life. I mean, I don't think a child should stay living at their parents' house for eternity. I think they need to get out there and experience the world on their own. So I pushed him for that. And I've gotten blowback from members of the family that say he shouldn't have been alone. She should have been home. And I have guilt for, are they right? Did I push him too hard, too fast by telling him at 25 years old that he needed to have an apartment and he needed to meet people and experience what the world has to offer? So I feel guilt there. And I do feel guilt that I have spent my last few years with Jen, my fiance, and we bought a camp up in Maine that we've been experiencing a joy that we have of living off grid in Maine. And it's a thing that I think Chris would have really enjoyed. And every weekend when we go to Maine, I would text Chris all week long, tell him what we were doing, how I was setting up the solar panels and getting the cabin wired to work off of batteries and everything that I did, an outdoor shower that's powered by propane and a DeWalt battery. And he was fascinated with all this stuff. And I feel guilt that we hadn't yet had him come up and see the camp and experience it for himself. And a bit of guilt that Jen and I had just had our wills done, and all of that was going to be left to Chris. We put it all in his name for circumstance if something happened to us. And I was like just a few weeks away from having him come up there and see it and tell him that all this is going to be yours, 30 acres up here. And I never got to tell him that. So while my guilt is not the same as either Tom or John's, I do still have guilt. And that's hard. It's to live with the what ifs. And I know you've talked about that a lot on your podcast, that everybody says you can't blame yourself, but you can't stop. You can't stop blaming yourself. It's all that your brain goes through I could have done something different. I could have saved him. But yeah. To get back to your actual question, the biggest challenge that I have found for me is the constant times when I just want to text him. A new show comes on TV. He and I were so alike when it came to our likes and dislikes. The movies we watched, the TV shows we watched. We loved riding our ATVs and dirt bikes and Jeeping. We both had Jeeps. We like to get out in the woods and get muddy. And everything that I do is something that he would do too. So I just watch this new show and I grab my phone to text him and say, hey, have you seen? And then I'm like, oh, crap. I have his phone right here sitting next to me, so he's not going to answer it. That's been my hardest challenge, is just not being able to talk to him. I mean, I can't say what I would give to have 5 more minutes. I mean, obviously I'd love 50 more years, but I'd be happy with 5 more minutes.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate your input on both of those things. I appreciate the feedback on the other and then your input on that. Tom, what would you say to the challenge piece of so far, what feels like the biggest challenge to you in your grief?
Just knowing that you'll never have that happiness again. Because I used to tell my wife, 52 years old, I said, there would be so many people that would love to be us. We got 2 great kids. We've done pretty well. We don't have to worry about the grocery bill or the air or the electric bill. Granted, we don't have a huge house, but we have done well. We have 2 kids. We're healthy. Life is great. And I was very appreciative of that. And now, I used to go to the park on Sundays. I still go to the park. I do a lot of hiking. And I used to just go to the park and reflect on how great our life is. And now when I go to the park, I think about how shitty my life is. And it's amazing because Nicholas was just one part of many things. We have a daughter, I have a wife, we have dogs, we have great families, but now he is consumed. His loss has consumed our whole life. and Mulaney's too, is completely consumed our life, even though he was a big part of it, but he was just a part. And so that's the biggest challenge, because every day it's a huge consumption of time. Everything I do, I think about him. And so that's the biggest challenge for me. It's just trying, will I ever be happy again? Do I laugh? Yes. I laugh all the time. But if I sit down and I'm alone, am I happy? No. Judging from John and other people who've been around, I know they say it gets different in a better way. But yeah, right now, I don't see that path. So
it's hard to see that where you're sitting, especially Corey, where you're sitting, which is somewhat still shielded by the shock of the first year. And Tom, the second year is tough. I know that there's some misnomers. I think it's a misnomer that the second year is harder than the first year. The second year, I think, is just, it's different. I always say it's sharper. It was kind of like my nerve endings were exposed in the second year, where they were still a little bit duller in the first year because you're more in shock and you're more in survival mode that first year. So if that means harder, I guess the second year, but how does anything get harder? I mean, for this. So I will say, and then I purposely left John for last in this part, because there are nuances of, as you go down this path and being where I'm at nearly 7 years, I can tell you that to try to blindly believe in the hope that there is going to be a time that you will feel happy again, it's never going to be the same kind of happiness you had before Nick was gone, or before CJ was gone, or before Christopher was gone, Corey. It's never going to be the same kind of happiness. But I do feel happy again for the most part when I sit down alone, where, like you, I probably for years, 3 or 4, couldn't say that I legitimately felt happy. It takes a lot of work. It takes more than time. A lot of people throw that time heals a lot. Yeah. Time doesn't heal anything. In my opinion, time's just time. It's what you do with that time, and it's the choices that you make in that time, whether that is to physically move, do things to be closer to your kids, do things that there's all these things that we have to do when we're restructuring and figuring out what our new life is going to look like, to rebuild. I have some moms that are very early on that refer to themselves, one gal that referred to herself as a baby griever. And I thought that was a really wise way to look at it in the first year, because it is like you're learning to live all over again. You're trying to learn how to live in a life that supposedly exists. Like you said, Tom, one piece of our family, one person is gone, and we have all these other, but yet it shatters our life wide open, just the loss of one person. And this human condition is so interesting. My husband and I talked about it recently, because I was basically saying that same thing to him, is how is it that the loss of one person, one of my children, has been so profound? Not that I think it would have been less profound if it was any of my children, it would have been the same. But it's the fact that it hurts so badly, and that we can't fully accept it. And that isn't probably the right word, because I've accepted that Alex isn't here anymore, but I don't know that I'll fully accept this is the way it feels like it should have been. And so it is an interesting thing to try to navigate. And it's really hard to think I'm going to be happy again. It is really hard. John, will you speak to the challenges and maybe a little bit to some of what's been talked about with these gentlemen that are in the earlier part of their grief than you are?
So for me, and I'll kind of break it up into a couple different parts. Early on, the challenges were making sure that our youngest son, Connor, knew that we were there for him, and made sure that he understood that and it's a tough way to say it, but this wasn't about him as a brother. It was CJ was struggling. And so early on, I mean, helicopter parents, in the worst way. It was terrible. And he was great about it. I mean, we did so many more things as a family, sometimes forced, sometimes it was just a nice way for us to all get away. As we went through, some of the biggest challenges is he did it outside of our house. So for all of us to walk out our front door and to walk down those steps and to know right there was where he did it. It took a toll on us as a family. And I know I didn't walk out that door anytime without doing it. Summer, fall, 4 feet of snow on the ground. It's just the way it was. I saw it. I saw the moment. I could hear it. I could hear the gun go off. I could hear the glass break. You could hear it all. And it wore on all of us. It wore on Connor. It wore on Hallie. It wore on myself. And we had to figure out a change. And so going through it, Connor's grown up and he's graduated high school and he's moving on. He's going to college and he's learning a trade. And now all of a sudden he's buying his own house. And the time has just flown by, but it's crawled by because every day we see the same thing. So our next challenge, which was huge, was to just which we've never done before, make a jump from Maine to Florida. No jobs, no nothing. We had to make the break because it was too painful every single day. And now I would say for all of us, well, I'll speak for myself. When you find yourself in moments of like, you're happy and you're laughing at something, and then you're like, what are you doing? You've lost, for me, my oldest son, and you're just sitting there laughing, and not laughing, but laughing at a funny joke or something like that. But you get pulled back into the reality of what your life really is. And you're the parent of a child who took their life. And for me, it's devastating. So, and my other biggest challenge is talking about it because I don't talk about it. Yeah. So
I know. That's part of the reason I'm so appreciative that you're here, because it's really important that wives and husbands and children hear that sometimes, even when it's hard, we need to force ourselves out of that comfort zone and talk about it, because it does matter, not only to other people, but it matters, I'm sure, to you to do it as well, as hard as it is sometimes. So I would like to talk about, and we talk about this, moms talk about this a lot as well, but it's different. It's different. So I'd love to hear you guys talk about how the loss of your child to suicide has affected relationships. And Corey, maybe you start, because I know you talked about the fact that you can come at it from one angle, because I hope for you that stays the same that it is now. You're at 9 months. So it very well could evolve and become a little bit different than it is now. It doesn't always, but quite often it does. Quite often it's after the first year, a lot of people see those shifts in relationships and things. But you can speak to this in any way you want, because you can speak to whether it's strengthen relationships, you can speak to specific relationships, or you can speak to them in general. But I find that there's no way that this hasn't affected some relationships, and just what your thoughts are on that.
Like I mentioned before, I have seen an outpouring of friendships that have strengthened. And not to say that any of these friendships were weak to begin with, but I just have been overwhelmed by the outpouring of people that have come out to that people that I just maybe wouldn't talk to for years at a time, but we're still friends. And then I just get a text that says, "Hey, how you doing?" And I found that to be awesome. I have sort of a strained relationship with a bunch of people in my own family. So I haven't had a lot of contact with them. I have, sadly, which I don't think I mentioned to you when we spoke earlier, was that my sister actually lost her husband 2 years ago to suicide. So now I have this in common with my own sister, and we were quite close, especially with her husband. He was more of a friend and a brother to me than a brother-in-law. So, but even with that relationship, I find her struggles, she was like John's family was, that she needed to get away. She lived in Maine and found the same thing, that everything that was there reminded her of her husband, and she needed to do a big change to get away from that. So now, like, the biggest one that I could connect to has moved away, and it's harder to talk to, but Other members of my family, I don't talk to that much as it is, but my dad, and I actually I have two dads. I have a father and a stepdad, but I call my father and my stepdad is my dad. They've both been very strong for me. And my fiance Jen's family has also been very supportive. So far, as of right now, I haven't felt any negative effects. I know maybe because I'm early in my journey here, maybe Tom or John having a little bit more time under their belts with this, they'll have seen something different. But for me, so far, it's been positive. I think a lot of the people that I'm surrounded by are very supportive.
I'm really glad. Yeah, I'm really glad. Thanks for sharing that. And I hope that stays consistent for you, because it does for some people. I don't think it's the norm, but I'm with you. I'm crossing my fingers with you as well, because that would be really great. So, John, would you like to speak to this a little bit? How has the loss of CJ affected relationships for you?
So my wife and I,
you're still married. So that's a good place to start. That's what I was going to say.
So listen, I learned well. So my wife and I have been married since 1991. We were high school sweethearts. To say that we've had each other's back through this, and I've heard it said tonight, when one person is down, the other one picks them up. And that's exactly what we do. We try to keep each other going. And the same thing with our son. I mean, we couldn't be more proud of how Connor has turned out through everything. I mean, he could have just called it quits and followed his brother's footsteps, but he took it as a personal challenge to grow. I mean, he and I are like two peas in a pod, quiet as the day is long. And CJ and Hallie were the exact same. Could talk to a perfect stranger for 2 hours about any subject whatsoever. So our relationship as a family has changed. Like I said before, new normal, just how we all kind of work it out and where we are. But we've lost friends 13 years into it, even 5 years into it, into this whole journey. We've had friends who are tired of hearing us say we're sad. And to some extent, they're just like, well, get over it. I'm sorry. And I hope you never understand to those people. I hope you never understand how it feels. But it's not a get over it thing. The outside world, through this whole thing, we've gained a lot of new friends, a lot of people, I say friends that we've met from the Scattering CJ documentary, Scattering Ashes all over the world. We had a good friend come all the way from Australia to the premiere in Maine, in Camden, Maine, which was a total shock to us. Just an absolutely fantastic family who took CJ's ashes on a trip of a lifetime with her entire family, including stepmoms, stepdads, and everything. So for the friends that we've lost, it's their loss, not mine. Because if you can't be with us at the hardest moment, then I don't want you to be there in the happiest moments. And for all of the people that we've gained and the stories that we've heard, hopefully our story makes a difference in your life, and you'll never have to experience what we've experienced.
Yeah. I agree. Tom, what say you to this?
So I think I've been very fortunate, because we go to a place, there's a grief center called Cornerstone, and I have not heard anybody say anything stupid to me, but unbelievable. I hear parents talk about what somebody said to them, and it's horrific. And I have a very close-knit friends. Most of my friends, I have 6 of them, I've known since I was 12 years old. And so we still hang out. As a matter of fact, we're in Indianapolis last week. So I have a lot of acquaintances, but I have just a core group of friends. And the relationships, as far as I've been very fortunate, have been stronger. They've never said anything stupid or inappropriate. They're very supportive. And for that part of my life, I couldn't be luckier. Oh. So I feel I'm very fortunate on that end.
I agree. You are. And I like John, feel like as the years have gone by, I feel like I have the same thing, as far as there have been friends that at a certain point just don't understand anymore. And the only thing I know to say to that is I'm glad that they don't. And that's where you start to figure out what your new community is going to look like. And it isn't like I had to make an entirely new community. My circle got smaller by choice, and then it's grown in an area where I now have community with people all over the world that what unites us is our loss. But that's not what we have. That's not all we have in common, if that makes sense. They're just friends that now understand. They're friends that live in the same village, if you will, right? They understand. And my husband, like you, Tom, grew up with a core group of friends that to me, I've met somebody else, because I always say, honey, most people didn't have Leave It to Beaver. Most people don't have their childhood friends still in their life. Most people don't. And now I've met another one who does. His friends and him were friends from, I think, 4. And they're still friends. They're scattered a little bit, but they still talk. They still get together every couple of years back in Kansas City whenever they're all there. And if one of them's in each other's neck of the woods, they look each other up. And that's who he considers his friends. And so, yeah, I don't have that. And so my group got smaller, and then it kind of got bigger, if that makes sense. So it changed, it shifted. And I'm like John in that the people that couldn't do this with me anymore, it's not my loss, it's theirs. So, but it took a while to wrap my head around how that could possibly be, right? Because you do sometimes think for me, it was some of the people that if you had asked me before, now I wouldn't have wanted you to say if you lost a child, because none of us would have said, well, that's not going to happen. But if you'd had something really tragic and horrible happened, who would be there with you? It's the ones that you said, hands down, these 3, most of them are gone. So we just don't know. We just don't know. Tragedy and loss has a way of revealing all of us in such a way that nothing else does. So as we wrap this up, guys, I would like to know if each of you could give, at the place you are in your journey, because that's the only place you can be, a piece of advice for another dad listening. What would that be? And Corey, we can start with you.
I guess, obviously, I'm early in my journey, and I found one of the biggest things to help me is the memorializing. I'm a handy type person. I'm in construction, so I build things all day long with my hands. And I found that one day I was doing a tile job and I had some extra mortar left over, so I just kind of smoothed it out into a circle on the ground. And as it was drying, I carved his name into it and just wrote in loving memory and his birth date and death date and gone too soon. And this disc is probably, 18, 20 inches around. And I've used this as a headstone because we didn't have him buried. We had him cremated, but I built an altar, if you will, with this stone, and I made a bench, and I've decorated it with little trinkets that I think he would have liked. And it just, things like that have kept me connected. And just like that time that I spend, and I have that location that I go to when I want to talk to him. It seems like I know I could talk to him anytime, just say it, but I feel like having that spot to go to helps me connect with him right there. And I say the second thing, which some people may not believe in or may not follow, but I say watch for signs that they're out there and that they're still connected to you, because I never was like a super strong believer in it until this tragedy happened. And now I can say I've seen things that I just can't explain, other than the fact that Chris is looking over me. And I mean, I'll tell a quick story about Chris. For a while, he lived in Florida after high school, and he had found a baby squirrel that had fallen out of a tree, just as a little pinky squirrel. And he brought it into the house and he raised it. He gave it milk and whatnot out of a bottle and raised it up until it was grown, and until he was able to turn it over to a shelter that would take it. And he had this connection with animals. And up at camp, right after Chris passed, this one particular red squirrel started hanging out on our deck. He would just sit there on the rails like he was looking in the windows. And I would come out with a handful of peanuts, and he'll come right up to me now, and he'll eat peanuts right out of my hand And if I don't give him a peanut fast enough, he'll jump on my foot and like look up at me like, where's my peanuts? And I just was like amazed that all of a sudden, out of the blue, this squirrel was connected to me like that. And one time I hadn't seen the squirrel all day on Saturday, and Sunday morning I was sitting at my little memorial bench and I was talking to Chris, and I said it out loud. I said, I don't know if this squirrel has a connection to you, or if you are the squirrel, or I don't know, but if there is, could you just give me a sign? I said it out loud. This is the first time I've ever asked for a sign. And I'm not lying to you. The squirrel came running out of the woods right then. And he didn't come all the way up to me, but he came about 10 feet away from me and just like sat there and looked at me after I asked for a sign. Suddenly the squirrel came out of the woods and looked at me, and I hadn't seen him for 2 days while we were up there. So I don't know, maybe I'm stretching, but I don't believe that I am. And I say to other dads or anybody who's grieving a loss like this to watch for those signs, because if you pay attention, it seems like they're out there.
They are. I'm a believer that if you listen, and it is hard, but asking makes a difference. I mean, apparently for what that's worth, they can hear us. So it's made a difference in my life. It's not the same as I'd still rather have him here, gosh dang it. But when I tell that to him sometimes too, I'm like, okay, enough with the music, or enough with, I can't today. I just want you back. And that's not going to happen, but it does help. And in some ways, I've told people this, and it took me up until the last couple of years to be able to say this, but the last few years, I feel like in some ways I'm a little closer to Alex. I would have liked to have continued that closeness in life, but he's ever present with me, and I can feel like I can call on him or talk to him at any time. And my other 2 kids are adults living their lives, right? It doesn't mean I don't think about them as much, but I mean, my 26-year-old son doesn't want mom calling all the time. I mean, he would be gracious about it. He's a wonderful kid, but he'd probably hang up and go, yes, that was mom again. And my daughter has 4 kids, so she doesn't have time to deal with that, but it's in many ways, we're more present. So I'm really grateful that you brought that up, because I think that it might give a little courage at times where some people need to hear that is something that is possible. So Tom, how about you?
Well, I don't think I'm in a position to give advice, but when this first happened, you get swamped with books, and oh my God, my wife bought lots of books, and I read probably 4 or 5 books, and I was booked out. But it was interesting because I read a book from Neil Peart, and he's the drummer for Rush.
My husband's a drummer, so I'm well aware.
So are you aware of his book that he wrote?
Yes.
And so he lost his daughter, his wife, and his dog in a 9-month period. His daughter in a car accident, his wife from cancer, and his dog. And so he took off on his motorcycle, and he rode 55,000 miles. And he just kept going. And it was a very good book. So I'm a huge motorcyclist. That's all I do is ride motorcycles. And so what is basically the advice I got from him is you just got to continue to feed your soul, do things that make you happy. And so that's what I do. Like I said, I still enjoy going to the park. Not the same, but I still enjoy going to the park. I still enjoy riding the motorcycles. And so that is what I do. Whatever makes, because again, the hardest part, we didn't talk about this, is when you live with somebody, my wife, we're in different modes. And yes, it's nice sometimes she picks me up and I pick her up, but we completely grieve differently. I can't sit still because I'll think about it. She can sit there and watch 15 episodes of The Good Wife. And so that it was very difficult. So we just learned that I do my thing and she does her thing. And then at the end of the day, we're together. But yeah, we grieve differently. So like I said, I can't give any advice, but just do it. Sitting watching TV for 12 hours does not do anything for my soul. So I have to go out there and do something. So like John said, you just got to keep moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. So, John, I'm going to let you wrap us up and finish off tonight with telling us what your advice would be for other dads that are listening.
So I would say don't do what I've done, which is for the longest time, don't talk about it. I can listen to anybody else talk. I'm a great shoulder to lean on. I'm there and I'll do anything you want. But boy, don't make me talk about it, because it is the toughest thing in the world. It is terrible. It's brutal. It absolutely tears me apart. But now it's even harder, because I'm now finally 13 years later coming to grips with so many things that I've just buried deep down inside. I'm so far behind the curve in all of these things that I struggle. I struggle every single day. I heard him say the conversations with your kid. I do. I have conversations in my head over and over. And it can be just the superficial stuff. It can be whatever. So my advice now, don't do what I did, which was struggle for so long in silence, which is the reason why we're here, and celebrate their life. They are not defined by the one moment, that one, and I say from my son, one snap decision, one poor decision that he made. Celebrate everything that they've done prior to that, and for CJ now, the lives that he's saved. And I can say he saved lives with the Scattering CJ project. It's too late for him, but for everybody else, if you're struggling, it's okay not to be okay, but find somebody and talk to them. So that would be my advice.
That's a perfect way to wrap up. And I appreciate you saying that. And that's, that very thing is why I'm so glad that you're here. You're here to say, I may be late and don't repeat what I did, but I'm talking now. So thanks for doing that. Thanks for coming and talking. And I appreciate all of you guys coming and talking, and we will absolutely talk soon. Goodbye, gentlemen.
Bye. Thank you.
Grievers, it is my hope that from today you will take that which serves you and simply leave the rest. If you connect with what you have heard, please subscribe to get notified of my new episodes every week, and please feel free to share it with others in the suicide loss community. If you are so led, I would also be honored if you would leave a review so that others might find us more easily. You can find me and all ways to connect with me at my Instagram, The Leftover Pieces. I want you to know that I know how very, very hard life is now. It's true that we will never be the same, but we are going to be okay. We will figure this out somehow, together, and we will keep our loved ones with us, because there is no getting over or past grief, only learning to live more gracefully alongside it. Only through talk can we keep their memories alive, learn to live again, and bring some awareness so that less will suffer. Join me again next week, and we will keep the talk going. We will sign off today, as always, with the wise words of my Alex's favorite, Peter Pan. Never say goodbye, because goodbye means going away, and going away means forgetting. Grievers, no one here is forgetting. Talk soon.